Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sunny Spot. And tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about philosophy and what is the path to truth. So I hope that you enjoy.
It's a sunny day, we got some time to stay. Hey, 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 and everything's okay. It's a sunny day, we got some time to stay. Hey, 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 and everything's okay. Hot sun, the rain's gone, we gonna have a lot of fun. All my circle got a smiling face for everyone. Life can be so beautiful when you stop be judging. You'll just be free.
All right. So the first person that I want to bring in with me is Bryce. Bryce is awesome. He is co-hosting with me today, and I want to thank you. You're muted, though, by the way.
Sorry. I hadn't said anything yet, but it's okay.
So I just wanted to thank you because you, honestly, you have been awesome. You've co-hosted with me a couple times now, and both times it's with fairly short notice. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do it. I'm excited for the guests that we have on, to friends of ours that we regularly interact with, but haven't seen them in a while, and they're going to teach us stuff. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, I always like to learn things. So the first one I want to bring in is Shane the Skeptic. Hey, Shane.
Hey, what's going on, guys?
What's up?
So tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, but I know this is an interesting question.
Right.
¿Tú hablas español?
Poquito. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm autistic, and autistic people tend to have a few things that they are like hyper focused on, hyper fixated on, like just a few hobbies that are just their specific interest, and it's like all they're interested in. And for me, that's been epistemology for over a year, I don't know, 2 years or so. And in the past, I was explaining to them before the show, the past like 6 weeks or so, I've been learning Spanish. So my new obsession has been that. So I could be a little bit rusty because it's been a few weeks since I've, read any epistemology or anything like that. But at the same time, I've been an epistemology nerd for over 2 years. I've had the conversations. I've explained my epistemology more times than I could remember. And when I was new to epistemology, of course, I would very regularly change some of my positions. Oh, now I'm an internalist about justification. Oh, now I'm an externalist about knowledge. Oh, now I'm a process reliabilist. Oh, now I'm an empiricist. Like when you're new to it, you're changing. But as time goes by, I think you start to change some of your positions less often. You become a little bit more stable in your epistemology and a little bit more confident in your ability to come to know things, come to have knowledge. So with that, I'm not an expert, just a nerd. So there you go. That's me.
Well,
we love nerds.
I'm a big time nerd, a big time geek, and I know just enough to know that I don't know a hell of a lot. So I'm excited to have you on here and to have this discussion. The next person I want to bring on is Ben Watkins. Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So if you could tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
So my name's Ben Watkins, and I'm one of the hosts of Real Atheology, a philosophy of religion podcast, where we explore questions in the philosophy of religion from non-theistic perspectives in a tradition that's often called the analytic tradition in philosophy. And so my team has a very wide range of views of different sorts of we all have non-theism in common, but some of us are externalists, some of us are internalists, some have a whole hodgepodge of views. So we have a nice, healthy disagreement among us on varying different issues. And so I always really enjoy these kind of conversations, just to kind of see other people, how other people wrestle with these questions, and hopefully something I say can, clear a few things up for one or two people.
Well, I think probably the first thing we need to do is figure out what some of these terms mean, because as I'm listening to you guys, I want to know what you mean. So what is, you mentioned empiricist, externalist, internalist, rationalist, some of these other terms. Let's start there, and either one of you can just spout out what are.
Sweet. So let me share my screen, and I'll just go right into it. Boop, boop. And I've got some quick slides that'll help visualize everything. Can everyone see?
Hold on one
screen?
second. I'll pull it up.
Sweet.
There we go.
Okay. So the big bad wolf of the whole bane of epistemology is this thing called skepticism. This idea that, like, look, our concepts of knowledge are just nonsense, and like we don't actually know anything. And so one of the ways of motivating skepticism is with an argument. And one such argument looks like the one you see in front of you. And so the first premise is that we cannot know our reasoning is justified. And the second is that we must know our reasoning is justified to have knowledge. Therefore, it follows we cannot know anything. And so this seems like a problem. It seems like, hey, we have to deny at least one of these premises. And so how do we do that? Well, at the start of the 20th century, a famous philosopher named G.E. Moore posed a challenge to skepticism and said, look, I know I have hands, and any premise that says that I don't know that I have hands is not as plausible as assuming that I have hands. This is one of my favorite arguments in all philosophy. One, because it's such a trollish argument, but second, because it makes just such a really good point. And so that brings us to internalism and externalism about knowledge. And so it's going to deny one of those premises. So the internalist about knowledge is going to say, look, we do know something. I know I have hands. And they're going to concede one of the premises of that skeptical argument and say, we must know our reasoning is justified to have knowledge. Therefore, it follows we can know our reasoning is justified. And so that undercuts the skeptical conclusion that we had before. But now the task for the internalist is to explain just how can we know our reason is justified? How is it, how is it that we can know, like if we have knowledge? Wouldn't we have to have already have knowledge in order to know our reasoning is justified? It just seems very hard to justify that claim. But that's the task of what internalists. Yeah, sure.
I don't know if your slides will get to this later or if I'm asking the question out of place, but do we have a working definition of knowledge?
So at this point, it's justified true belief, but
Okay.
Those are necessary conditions for knowledge, but it's not clear those are sufficient conditions, and that's where Gettier cases would come into play.
Yep.
But
And Shane,
that might
I'm
be
sure
getting,
that might
be getting a little too far ahead.
Okay, fair enough.
But I think it's a great question. So let me just real quickly characterize externalism then. So externalism concedes the other premise and says, look, we cannot know our reasoning is justified. That's just not something we can know. It's if we have knowledge, it's because of conditions external of ourself. Whereas with the internalist view, it says, no, it's something internal. And for us to have knowledge, it has to be features that are internal to me. I have to, be aware that I have knowledge. And the externalist is saying, no, we know we have hands, but we cannot know our reasoning is justified. So it would follow from those two premises that we do not need to know our reasoning is justified to have knowledge. So again, we avoid that skeptical conclusion, but now we have this other claim. We cannot know our reasoning is justified. Well, then how is it that we have knowledge? How is it that there's conditions external to us that make it the case that we can have knowledge? And so that's the project of externalism, is to try to explain that. And so that's really all I had as far as explaining the problem. I hope that those visuals were at least able to, help people see what it is like internalists and externalists disagree about and what's at stake in the disagreement, because one of them is right and one of them is wrong. And the one that's wrong is really standing over skepticism. Like that's the implication. So like the stakes couldn't be higher.
Right.
in this disagreement. And I'll go ahead and lay my cards on the table. I don't know which one of these is true. I think they're both plausible. And so I have a really hard time. So if depending on the week that you catch me, my internalist side will be like, no, well, these models of internalism seem closest to the truth. Whereas a few weeks later, my inner externalist is going to be like, no, that's total rubbish. It's
I
these
was
models
in
over here.
like exactly what you just described. There was like a 2 or 3 month period where I was in the same way. Like every time I would read a paper, I would be like, fuck, I just keep changing my mind depending on the last paper
Yeah.
I read, because that was a really good argument for internalism. But then somebody else makes a response to that paper and you go, oh, yeah. But she's not wrong. And so
So where do you stand now, Shane?
I for I think over a year now have been an internalist about justification, but an externalist about knowledge. And the question about, you know, when we're on the surface talking about internalism or externalism in epistemology, we're talking about you know, in reference to knowledge. So I'm an externalist about knowledge, and I'm quite confident in that position. Now that I've held to it for so long and had so many discussions and read so much, and I guess maintained the position for as long as I had. So if you could put, I'm sharing my screen. If you could put, I'll just show like 3 slides. So one thing, I mean, there was a lot that he was spot on about, but he was very spot on about when he said that the underlying, I guess, motive for epistemology is skepticism. We want to overcome skepticism. And I know to some people that might sound ironic for me to say when I have the word skeptic in my name, but for me, the whole point of skepticism is you want to defeat it. You want to provide skepticism, but then you want to defeat that skepticism, and that's the whole point of skepticism. Because if you apply skepticism to something, and you know, you apply skepticism to a belief, your belief could withstand skepticism. You know,
would it be fair to say, Shane, that skepticism is the method that we use to attain knowledge?
Well, so there are different types of skepticism.
That's
right?
That's the other question that I was going to characterize: rationalism and empiricism.
Yeah. So there's like academic skepticism, the belief that we can't actually know anything independent of our immediate experience. Then you have Pyrrhonian skepticism, which is more to say that we should suspend judgment. And so anyway, with skepticism, generally in epistemology, when you hear the word skepticism, it's going to be something to the effect of the belief that we can't come to know anything, or the idea that we can't come to know anything. So, you know, rebuttals to skepticism, refutations to skepticism, you know, overcoming skepticism is basically trying to say, well, actually, here's how we come to know something. So I'll read, I've just 3 slides. One approach used as a rebuttal to skepticism is epistemic externalism, which is the negation of epistemic internalism. There's a distinction between internalism and externalism about justification and about knowledge. Internalism about knowledge maintains that for a justified true belief to be knowledge, the subject must be able to know that his belief is justified. According to externalism about knowledge, for a subject to have knowledge, the justification condition must hold, but it isn't necessary that he be able to know that it holds. In other words, a subject can be justified in a belief without knowing why he's justified. Under this view, as long as perception, reason, and logic are reliable, we can come to have knowledge through the use of these faculties. We don't have to know that logic and reason are reliable to have knowledge. They just have to be reliable. So yeah, that's where I stand with it. I find that internalism about knowledge fails because of the infinite regress problem, because if in order to know that P, so in epistemology, just for those who don't know, if you ever hear for S to know that P, S is going to be the subject, the person coming to arrive at the belief. P is going to be the proposition, you know, what is asserted to be the case. If in order to know that P, I have to know that I know that P, then in order to know that I know that P, I have to know that I know that I know that P. But in order to know that, I have to know that I know that I know that I know that P. and then thus you have an infinite regress. There's an infinite amount of times in which I have to know something in order to know something, and thus I could never arrive at my first case of knowledge. Under the externalist view, however, you're coming to say, okay, maybe I don't know how I know. I might not be able to cite my justification, but it could still be the case if I arrived at the belief in the proposition through the use of a justification conferring faculty, and we could argue about what that is. But if you have the necessary conditions for knowledge met, then basically we're just saying that it's not a necessary condition that you know that you're justified. Again, we're in agreement because you talked about necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. So we're in agreement that justification is a necessary condition for knowledge. The disagreement is whether or not knowledge of being justified is necessary for a case of knowledge.
So we do have a couple of questions that I'm sure Sonny wants to get to, but before that, Shane, does that mean that being an externalist with respect to knowledge, is that the defeater for presuppositionalist apologetics, or for apologetic people who make apologetic arguments who are presuppositional?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to defeat
because their whole
presuppositionalism from the externalist perspective. Although, like I have friends who were like David Pullman, for example, who is he's a Christian. He's a rationalist, internalist, and he has like a whole series refuting presuppositionalism. So you could do it from that epistemology too. But I guess I see what you mean though, Bryce, when you're saying like, does it kind of just defeat it because they come to say, well,
how do you know anything? Like Saiton Brigade or whatever his name is.
Right. Exactly.
That's what he always goes to. So, like, well, how do you know anything? How do you know what you know?
That's the thing about those skeptical scenarios is, okay, I'm willing to grant, okay, I can't know that I'm not a brain in a vat. I can't know that I'm not dreaming. But if I'm not dreaming, right, then I have knowledge. So you're saying like, oh, but you don't know that you're not dreaming. Okay.
But that doesn't matter.
But that doesn't matter. And so I've made this point before in a debate where I said, let's say you go to a doctor and she diagnoses you with pneumonia. Are you willing to say that doctor doesn't know that you have pneumonia if she can't explain how she knows that she isn't dreaming?
Or I think it's worse than that, because it's like saying, are you willing to say that you don't have pneumonia because she doesn't know that she's diagnosed?
Well, exactly, because imagine if you were to ask the doctor, well, how do you know that I have pneumonia? And she says, well, I ran reliable lab tests. Well, how do you know the lab tests are reliable? She says, well, I learned how the equipment worked when I was in med school. Well, how do you know that everything you learned in med school was true? And then you just keep going down those skeptical
How do you know the
rabbit
past
holes.
is real?
It devolves into absurdity.
and then you go all the way down to the foundation, right? And you go, well, how do you know that you're not a brain in a vat? And then the doctor doesn't know how to answer that question, and she can't prove to you that she's not a brain in a vat, that she's not the victim of an evil demon, that she's not dreaming.
Therefore, you're cancer free.
Well, I don't have any reason to say that you know that I have pneumonia. I think this would be a very irresponsible way to go about understanding knowledge, and I think that would be the type of consequence that would come of it.
And no one does that. Like, no one believes that. Like,
right? No, like exactly.
It doesn't matter.
That's the thing. Is these kinds of like skepticism has its place, but you don't apply skepticism in that way where it doesn't belong. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's only ever done with their God belief. Then we should be applying it, maximum skepticism.
Well, no, so the thing is, skepticism is healthy for epistemological conversations, but like, let's say we're talking about skepticism of memory, right? How do you know that what you experience as a memory is actually an accurate representation of the past? In a conversation about epistemology, that's beneficial. In a general conversation in a relationship, that's gaslighting. You know what I mean? Like, skepticism is different depending on where you apply it and how you apply it.
See, it is, yes, but also we know that our memories are fallible, that we actually don't have great memories, and that people don't remember things. We also know that from anyway, that's a whole
Well,
other
we know,
topic.
we know that they're imperfect, right? But I would.
Right.
I
still
think maybe
grant
the point you were trying to
reliability.
make, Shane, is that you would never use that in an argument with your spouse or your relationship to say,
Right.
if they say, I remember you told me you were going to be there to pick up the kids, and then you reply with, well, how
Right.
do you know your
How do you-
memory
how do
is?
you know that?
Memories can be, then
And
that's
you've
just
been
going to,
anything can be
dreaming, right,
taken
yeah.
to a toxic end, no matter
Right.
what it is. But really
So-
quickly, I do want to say hello to everybody who is in the chat, because I tend to forget to do that, and I really want everyone to know. First of all, we have some great people on Facebook. All I see is Facebook user. So thank you guys from Facebook for joining us. We also have Aaron Coalson, Shane Billowitz. We have Farron Salis. We have Riri or Rai Rai. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. And we have Theo. Hey, Theo. Let's see who else we have. Off the Chain, Atheist. Good to see you as well. And we have some others. So if I miss you, I apologize. But thank you guys for all coming on. And we do have some really great questions that are just waiting. So I'm going to let Ben, you were about ready to speak. I'm going to have you speak, and then I'm going to start having some of these great questions come in.
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of play the internalist for this conversation to at least give us some meat to disagree with and whatnot. And so try to push back a little bit. Before I do that, there was Bryce asked a very good question about, how is it that you know things? And so the other part of this question was the empiricist rationalist part of this question. And so there's a tradition in the philosophical canon of rationalist thinkers and empiricist thinkers. And so the empiricists were like, look, we get knowledge. The source of our knowledge is from our senses, from our experiences of the world. And the rationalists are like, no, we get some of our knowledge, and in fact, the most important knowledge prior to our experiences. And, their favorite example was math. They would always, point to math and be like, look, that's not empirical. Come on, man. But the empiricists would be like, look, like they had all of these brilliant ways of motivating the empiricist way of knowledge, and the fallibility of our senses, and why the way we learn things is by being things in the world with senses. That's how we learn all these great things. And so Kant famously came along and wedded the two views together, where it was like, we have a manifold of senses, and we bring rational impression or categories to this manifold of senses, like space and time and causation. And so the rationalists are partly right, and the empiricists are partly right. And so Descartes was famously in the rationalist camp. And so everyone knows Descartes for saying, I think, therefore I am. Why is that so famous? Why is that such a famous piece of philosophy? And because what Descartes is doing is, from that rationalist perspective, like trying to know prior to experience, he's saying, look, I'm trying to find the foundations of my knowledge. How is it something that I can know that's indubitable, a thought that I cannot get behind? And so that's the sort of thought that we would need to answer Shane's infinite regress problem. So we need some sort of internalist criteria of knowing that our belief is justified, that didn't lead to some sort of infinite regress. And so internalists propose rationalist principles like that, principles that we would have to know a priori, prior to our experiences. And so one such principle is known as the principle of phenomenal conservatism. The idea that if something seems like it's the case, then you have at least prima facie justification for its truth. And the way to defeat a seeming is with another seeming, that something else seems to be the case that's stronger than that previous seeming. So when you ask those questions, like, well, how do you know that there's other minds? How do you know that the past is real? The externalist is going to say, well, I know these things in a properly basic way. I've formed these beliefs in the right way. Well, the internalist is just going to say, no, it seems like there are other people there, and it seems like my memories are reliable, and it seems like there's a past. And I don't have any defeaters. I don't have any other seemings that defeat that seeming. And so I'm justified in having that belief. If I had reasoned, if it seemed like I was in a dream, well, then that might defeat my belief. Or if you showed me some test that showed that my memory was unreliable in some sort of way, okay, well, that seeming might outweigh my but either way, there's these seemings, that there are these thoughts that we just can't seem to get behind. And so you might go, well, is there an infinite regress of seemings? Well, no, because it doesn't seem like seemings are those kind of thoughts. It seems that once I seem something, that's it. That's where the story ends. I don't have to seem a seeming. I don't need a meta seeming. Seeming it's a direct way of seeing it. And so that's another part of the rationalist the internalist externalist disagreement. Is some externalists would say, no, you can't. It would go all the way. It would be turtles all the way down. There is no direct seemingness, and so that's one very big disagreement among those two camps.
Yeah, right. Rene Descartes' book, the one you referenced, where
Meditations.
First Meditations on Philosophy. Where the Cogito comes from. That was actually an influential book on my epistemology, because I think that was largely what motivated me toward foundationalism. So I'm a foundationalist, and I think largely as a result of that book. The disagreement then would be saying that like the internalist reaches that foundation internal to them, so they find it internal to the thinker. Whereas the externalist finds that foundation in the belief-forming process. The belief-forming process is the foundation of the knowledge. Is that right? Yeah. So it's hard because we're talking about three different sort of dichotomies within epistemology today. We're talking about the internalism versus externalism, the empiricism versus rationalism, and now we're going to the foundationalism versus coherentism conversation. And I'm trying not to skip past one into the other, but they're just so kind of
they overlay. Yeah, they're intertwined. It's hard
not to. Because when you talk about foundationalism, for example, it's like, okay, then that raises questions like what's the foundation then, right?
What's the alternative to foundationalism?
Coherentism. So foundationalism.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm interrupting.
Foundationalism, roughly explained. Let's just come up with a model for it. Think of foundationalism as you have an upside down pyramid, right? The very bottom of this pyramid, you have your foundational beliefs upon which all of your secondary beliefs rest, right? So, like you have a belief that you're talking to me right now. That belief rests on a more basic belief, and the basic belief would be, for example, that you have internet, or that you can see, or that your empirical senses are reliable, because
that I exist in a shared reality with other people.
Yeah, precisely. Like there are certain foundations, and there's the foundations of your epistemology, how you come to know things, and then I think there's also the foundations of what your beliefs are. But yeah, so think of foundationalist epistemology. You have that upside down pyramid, at which the bottom is your most basic beliefs, upon which your secondary beliefs rest. And those you have unjustified justifiers at the bottom. Well, depending on if you're a fallibilist or infallibilist. I would be a fallibilist, so I would say that you would have, and as an externalist, I can justify saying you have unjustified justifiers at the bottom. But then with coherentism, this is a theory of justification that says that what confers justifiedness of beliefs, think of it more as like a crossword puzzle. Think about how when you do a crossword puzzle, as you fill out one word, you become further justified in knowing what the next word will be. Like, okay, these two words overlap here. So now I know that this is a 5-letter word, and I know that the second letter to it is going to be A. Like as you
think of an unanchored web, beliefs are like webs that aren't anchored to anything.
Right. And so according to coherentism, what confers justifiedness is the coherence of your beliefs. As long as your beliefs cohere, then you're justified. And then, so for me, as the foundationalist and empiricist, I hold that perception is the foundation of one's epistemology. your starting point from how you come to know anything is through perception. And I think the way you perceive is via empirical senses. The empirical senses are the context-specific mechanism through which you come to be acquainted with information in the external world. So I guess another way of
well, I would say that I already lean towards that, and I don't
Right.
see the actual defeater to both of those things you said, and maybe Speed
Well-
has one, but I suspect that Sonny probably wants to get to some of these questions first, because
We actually have quite a few questions,
Yeah.
and some of them I feel like like you guys have touched on. But so if it feels like you've already answered this, just kind of maybe do like a little wrap up to kind of help. So here we had a couple from a Facebook user. How are we supposed to know that we cannot know our reasoning is justified? Oh, that stumped. Everybody just gets real quiet.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question right. But how are we supposed to know?
The question came up while you were presenting an explanation for skepticism, and you were saying like one of the premises was we cannot know our reasoning was justified. I think that was the time in which that question was asked.
Correct. Yes.
So the idea is that to know, like, we can't know. It seems like we can't know that we know something unless we already know it. Like, this is kind of like the bootstrapping problem. Like, I can't bite my own teeth and I can't look myself directly in the eye. How is it that I can have knowledge? How can I know that I have knowledge of something unless I've already got the knowledge? I need some sort of knowledge directly. And so,
well,
like,
that seems definitional. Then it seems like it would just comes down, because if we're defining knowledge as justified and true beliefs,
yeah.
then
Well,
we
so
don't-
but you have a circularity problem. So it has to be something intrinsically. Like Shane pointed out, it can't be turtles all the way down. Okay, and we don't want a circle of justifications, the coherentist, because circular arguments are invalid. They don't support their conclusion. And so what we need is something intrinsically justifying. And so that's the task of the internalist, is to, what is that? What does that intrinsically say, what does an intrinsically self-evident proposition about the world look like? And so, that's
Shane.
what Kant set out to, he famously saw the skepticism of Hume's empiricism, and it awoke him from his dogmatic slumber, as the story goes. Because he was like, guys, metaphysics is in real trouble here.
So here's another one. Does solipsism play into this discussion, or is that a tangent?
No,
Yeah,
the
so we
answer is
were
yes.
Yeah, when we talk about skepticism, solipsism is a version of skepticism.
Yeah. So that's external world skepticism taken to
Yeah.
its extreme. It's
Right.
saying, look, the only thing that I can be confident that exists starts at Descartes' cogito, that I think, therefore I am, and then nothing passes. We
Right.
start there, and we don't get any further than that.
Right. And as the externalist, I can say, like, with the whole solipsism thing, I don't have to know that I'm not dreaming in order to know if it's raining outside. So if somebody, if we're trying to figure out the truth of some proposition and whether or not I could have knowledge of it, can I know that it's raining outside? The internalist might be tempted to say that, well, if you can't know that you're not dreaming, you can't know that it isn't raining outside. Because in order for you to know that it isn't raining outside, or that it is raining outside, you would first have to know that you're not dreaming, and you can't know that. But then as the externalist, I say, well, that's off of the presupposition that that there is an external world, right? Or inference to the best explanation. If you think that it's not something that has to be presupposed, I think that it is. Then I would say, yeah, I as long as it is the case that it's raining outside, and I come to justify a belief in it, and I'll talk more about, because I actually think there's a fourth condition necessary for knowledge, not just justified true belief. But yeah, for that reason, as an externalist, I can come to know that it's raining outside. I don't have to know.
But that depends on it. but that depends on it actually being raining outside.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Because
What
of
if
the
it's
fact
not
that
raining outside?
Well, so truth is one of the necessary conditions of knowledge, and actually,
I
I think,
agree. That's why
this
I
would-
asked the question. So if it's
Yeah.
not raining outside, it is therefore not true that it's raining outside. You could still arrive at the conclusion that it's raining outside, and you
Correct. Let's
wouldn't
say the
call it.
sprinklers were on, and it was the water was going up against the window, and I then arrived at a belief, maybe a justified belief, because I arrived at the belief through the use of my empirical senses. But because of the fact that it's not true, it wouldn't count as a case of knowledge. But I actually think that that's a good point to bring up, because I'd also really like to get Ben's response to this. Because you talked earlier about the necessary conditions for knowledge, and I normally preface the discussion about epistemology with that part of the conversation, where necessary conditions and sufficient conditions. So for those who don't know, A is a necessary condition of B, means that in order for B to be the case, A must be the case. A doesn't entail B, it's just that in order for B to be true, A must be true. That's what it means for A to be a necessary condition of B. For A to be a sufficient condition of B means that if A is the case, then B is also the case. So when we talk about the justification, we talk about the conditions for knowledge, we talk about truth of the proposition. As we just said, you can't know something if it's not true, right? So truth, you have to believe it. You can't be said to know something if you don't actually even think it's the case, right? So it has to be true. You have to believe it. But obviously, if you believe something and you believe it correctly, you could get it right by chance. And believing something and being right by chance is different from knowing something. So there's something differentiating regular true beliefs from knowledge. One of them, the most clear one, is justification. So there's your third condition, right? Three necessary conditions for knowledge: justification, truth, and belief. The Gettier problems raise the issue that there are actually also circumstances in which all three of these conditions could be met, but still you cease to have a case of knowledge. And I think
I have issues with some of these, but yeah, you can go ahead and talk about it. Did you want him to go through that now, Sonny, or did you want
I'll give an example. I want to give an example of a Gettier problem.
Let him do an example of the Gettier problem, and then actually explain the Gettier problem, and then maybe 2 Gettier cases, and then I'll explain my fourth condition and why I think it overcomes the Gettier problem.
Yeah.
Okay, but before you do, I just want to say you have a little baby at home and you're expecting another, and I swear you just look like your baby's coming through. Like, come on, let's do this fun thing.
Yeah, I love Gettier problems because it's one of famous philosophy is famous for not having any sort of consensus, and like it's just people say what's
famous or is it infamous?
Infamous for people are like, why waste your time doing these arguments? They never convince anyone. They're never influential. That's not the case with Gettier problems. Pretty much everyone concedes that Edmund Gettier is like, no, the justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge, because we can give very clear counterexamples where someone is justified in their belief, but it's false, and so therefore it's just not knowledge, or it's true in a sense. So one of the best way to see this is with examples. So let's imagine that there's a field, a farmer's field, who has cows in the field all the time, and every time you go to this field, you see these cows, and you love to just stop and look at these cows. And so you one day come up to the field, unbeknownst to you, the farmer has been having problems with people stealing his cows. So he's trying to catch the cow thief. And so he paints a bunch of cows, fake cows, out in the field. Now you look out in the field and you see what look like cows, and you have previous experiences of seeing cows in that field. And so it seems like you have a true belief that you are looking at a cow, but you're not actually looking at a cow.
And I have an objection to that.
But I think the better illustration of the problem, though, is then let's say you look at a cow in that field and it is a cow. Do you actually know that it's a cow if it
Yeah.
also could have been the case through the method you used to arrive at this belief, okay, you got it right, but you could have easily been looking
I
at
left
what
that
those
part out.
cow
Thank you.
replicas.
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say there also has to be cows in the field too.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there has
Yeah.
to be actual cows in the field. There has to
So-
be
But-
fake cows in
But
the
so you're
field.
Gettier-
justified. Yeah. Go
Right.
ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, so the Gettier case is actually the case in which it is a cow, right? But it could have not been a cow because through this same method that you used, as we see, you know, like we just explained, you could have arrived at a belief in one of the.
Okay, that
fake
destroys
cows.
my objection then, because that was
Okay.
going to be my objection. It
Okay.
was, that was the part that he's right. You did leave that part out because I was
I'm sorry.
immediately seeing.
I
the
got so
problem.
excited. I got ahead of myself. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
hard not to with the Gettier cases.
Because what I was going to say was, if there are actual cows out there and painted cows, even if you don't know that there are some painted cows, if you know that there are, if there are actually cows out there and you can
But once you see what
appears to be
Gettier is
cows,
doing,
you
it's
have
very
a
easy to come
justified
up.
belief.
Yeah, it's very easy to
Right.
come up with your own. In fact, that
Yeah.
much like trolley problems have become an internet meme,
Yeah.
there are
I use them
Gettier
all the
memes
time.
where
Oh.
people come up with their own Gettier cases.
I have a
You know, where
Snoop
they-
Dogg one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
they'll
thinking
they'll
Bryce-
fake like the backgrounds of their Zoom calls
Yeah.
to make all their people, like the people watching them, have a justified true belief that they're wherever they say they are, but they don't. It's not actually knowledge.
Right.
Facebook, let's do your Snoop Dogg one after the question, Shane, because
Okay.
a Facebook user has an interesting question that I would like to
All right.
know what you guys say to it. Can knowledge be reduced to each of the senses, or is knowledge something emergent from the senses?
That's the
Depends on-
rationalist empiricist disagreement.
Yeah.
So the rationalist would say that knowledge is emergent from the senses, correct?
Or it's
No.
prior to
Yeah.
the senses. So
And then
that something like 7 is a prime number. It's something that I can figure out in my armchair. I don't have to go outside. I don't have to do any sort of test to refute it. There's no evidence empirically through my senses that I could use to falsify or confirm it. And so that it's prior to experience.
I would say that I don't think that counts as knowledge, because it's true. 7 is a prime number, but you only learn that through mathematics.
Well, there's
and
mathematical
structure.
proofs. And so
No, but
proofs are knowledge.
And then, well, my objection as an empiricist, because like he said earlier, math is usually the rationalist's favorite example of like, well, here's something I can know without having to use empirical senses. Well, I think that you come to learn of mathematical propositions through the use of your senses. You learn 2 + 2 = 4 because you have 2 and 2
yeah,
things. put
like what if I
together.
don't know math?
Yeah, but so I think that there's a bigger point. So how we learn it, yes, there might be ways in which we use our senses instrumentally, but however, the conceptual understanding is internal to our. So we have to conceptualize something, the concept 7, and we have to conceptualize the concept of a prime number.
Yeah.
And then we have to figure out the relationship between them. Now, we might use our senses to manipulate some physical examples to help us see that conceptual understanding differently, such as we see it. But the empiricists or the rationalists' point is that, look, this just isn't a truth of the senses. Our senses are contingent. Our senses could be mistaken, but our senses can't be mistaken about 7 being a prime number, assuming, a base 10 number system and all those things that go with the proof. Like, mathematical proofs are not something that you or I could go do an empirical test and then say, look, we've refuted the claim that 7 is a prime number. It's just not something we could do.
I agree with that. I just don't think that you can claim that because you cannot refute it, it counts as not, because it cannot be refuted through empiricism, that it counts as knowledge. I think.
Well,
you
no,
have to
so because
actually-
so the proof is the justification. So it's something that we believe is true, and we can justify with a proof, and so that gets us at least the necessary conditions of knowledge. But then we're also saying that it can't be true, so that rules out a Gettier case.
Right. So I want to get. Were there any more questions? Because I want to get to my fourth condition.
Yeah,
or-
there were two more. You guys have actually kind of been answering this one, but I want to go ahead and put it on because he's been waiting a while to have this. So what is the role of fallibilism in knowledge, especially in science? I mean, in a sense, you guys have been answering that.
It's just that's like a whole topic.
Yeah, because we could get into skepticism about induction here
Yeah.
real quick. But basically, so for the people in the audience that are wondering, so fallibilism is this idea that, are our beliefs incorrigible? Are they open to doubt? If they're fallible, they're open to mistake. Whereas, an infallible knower, like a god, if there was such a being, their knowledge would not be infallible. If they knew X must be the case. But in the case for us, where if we believe something, if God believes X must be the case. Whereas if we believe X, it's not the case that must be, our beliefs are fallible. And so how does that concession influence science? So there's science in the most technical sense that we understand it nowadays, the natural sciences. But historically, science has meant more broad concept, just a systematic way of thinking.
I would add that I think a fallibilist, like if you were a foundationalist, a fallibilist would hold that your foundations could be fallible and you could still have knowledge even if your foundations are fallible.
Okay, and a final question from the audience. Is awareness of your existence an empirical sense?
I don't think so. I think it's an a priori.
I would. Oh, this is tough for me because I would say that our senses and confirm our awareness of our existence.
I
But someone, go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say you have experience and you experience awareness of your existence. If you didn't have any empirical senses, because that includes feel, right? Then I don't know how you would have awareness of your existence. But yeah, I don't know. So I don't think it is. But
I don't want to say that.
If you look at other animals besides us, they probably have empirical senses without having necessarily a sense of self.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
I think
true.
that right there is where you get the change.
But I think the question we're trying to examine is, can you have the opposite? Can you have awareness without the empirical senses? And the reason I want to say no is because even though I agree with everything that Shane said, when we start getting into AI and artificial intelligence, right? If a supercomputer cannot see, cannot hear, cannot feel, can it ever be self-aware?
Right.
And if we go with that model, then the answer must be no. So,
and there's also the question of consciousness here, because there's a conscious experience of a self. So I'm a reductionist about the self. I don't think there's actually a little homunculus somewhere behind my eyes. That where the I resides. But we're still talking about the first person inner experience of existence, of our, to use Hume's language, the bundle theory. So all of our senses are bundled together, and the bundle that they form is the self. And so to me, this just by definition is prior to the senses. But then Hume would avoid that by just saying, there just is no I. Like once you explain each of the individual senses and each of the individual mental functions, there is nothing left. There is
I'm with Hume on that one.
Yeah, ghost in the machine.
Because even the first thing that you said, where all of the
point
senses
from the rationalist, I think, still stands, is that the knowledge, it's an a priori argument against the self. And so that argument has premises, and those premises come from what? Our prior knowledge of what it's like inside, the bundles, the things that constitute the bundles. Those are all prior to experience because they're the preconditions for experience.
All right, so Shane, I want to now go to your fourth. I've been waiting to
Yeah.
hear what this fourth one
Right.
is. So
And
let's-
yeah, no, I've been
I
getting
think it has to
anxious
do with
'cause I'm
Snoop
like,
Dogg.
so I'll give an example of another Gettier case. And it's the Snoop Dogg Gettier case that I came up with. And then I'll explain my fourth condition that I wouldn't say it solves the Gettier problem, because I still agree with Edmund Gettier that justification, truth, and belief are not sufficient conditions for knowledge. I just have a fourth condition that I think is. So it doesn't solve the problem. It just,
It
works off,
redefines knowledge, doesn't it?
works off of it. Yeah, it helps.
Well, no,
you
it's
get
his.
to knowledge.
It's his. I think he's being a little uncharitable to himself here, because it's his proposed solution to the Gettier problem, and so
Well,
then
I
it's
feel like
up
a
to us to decide
solution-
whether or not it succeeds or not.
Yeah. Well, I just feel like to solve the Gettier problem would really mean to prove that those three conditions were sufficient. But I agree that those three aren't sufficient.
Oh no! I wouldn't say that. Solving the Gettier problem just means that we
Coming up
show
with-
the necessary and sufficient conditions for
Okay.
knowledge.
Well, then
that
well,
solves
then I,
the.
well, then I think
yeah.
I might just have it.
Yeah.
So another Gettier case. So let's say you look across the street, right? And in a store across the street, you just you look over for a few seconds. You see Snoop Dogg standing in the store right across the street. And maybe we want to throw a little extra justification in there. Maybe you're in Long Beach and it's more likely that this is somewhere he would reasonably be.
Yeah, it's a dispensary.
There we go. Right? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
there he
that's why I
is.
said it.
So
So you see Snoop Dogg in a dispensary in Long
right.
Beach.
So
perfectly plausible.
you arrive at a belief that Snoop Dogg is there. Now let's just say Snoop Dogg is in fact in that store, right? But what you saw was a cardboard cutout of Snoop Dogg. So you arrived at a true belief that Snoop Dogg was in that dispensary. I mean, it's a dispensary. So it is true, right? You're justified in believing it because you arrived at it through a justification conferring process, your own eyes, right? And you believe it. So you believe it, you're justified in believing it, and it's true. But why is it not a case of knowledge? This is the Gettier problem, is you have a justified true belief, but there's something differentiating it from knowledge. Because if we're just like looking at our linguistic intuition, what do we mean when we say somebody knows something? If you look at the case where you arrived at the belief because you saw a cutout, we're going to say, no, you didn't know Snoop Dogg was in the store.
Because it was a cutout.
Right. If you didn't see Snoop Dogg, you saw a cutout and you were right by chance. Because he happened to actually be there, it was correct. Okay. So the fourth condition is called the sensitivity condition. I didn't come up with this condition. It's just I think it solves the problem. The sensitivity condition goes as follows. S would not believe that P if P were not true. Now, again, just to clarify, this is not asserting that the condition is always met. But the condition is, if P were not true, S would not have arrived at a belief in P. And then if you look at any of the Gettier cases, right? Let's look at the Snoop Dogg one. Let's say you arrived at a belief that Snoop Dogg was in the dispensary because you actually saw him. Then that condition is met, because if it wasn't true, you wouldn't have been caused to believe it. However, if you arrived at a belief that Snoop Dogg was in the dispensary because you saw a cardboard cutout, then even if it wasn't true, you would have still believed it. And I think that fourth condition is what separates knowledge. So knowledge is justified true belief, which would not have been arrived at if not true. Now, I don't think that the subject can come to know whether or not the sensitivity condition is met. So I don't think that you can know, if P were not true, would I believe that P? I don't think the subject can know that, but as an externalist, I can get around that problem and say the subject doesn't have to know that the sensitivity condition is met. It just has to be met.
So I think that, and I'm going to let Ben answer this himself. I think that you have solved the Gettier problem. Unfortunately, by doing so, I think you've fallen into the presup trap, where they're just going to ask you, how can you know anything? Because if you admit that you can't actually know whether the sensitivity condition is met, or however you put that, then they're just going to default to
because that is conflating knowledge with certainty. And because of the fact that definitions of knowledge that require certainty are so vulnerable to skepticism, virtually everyone in epistemology has abandoned such definitions of knowledge. So
are you saying that the precepts define knowledge as certainty?
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter how many times you tell them that there's a distinction.
Even if they don't do it explicitly, it usually comes out in how they ask their questions. Their questions will use loaded terms.
It's normally their criticism is, you can't be certain that P, therefore you don't know that P. Or a better formulation, knowledge requires certainty. You're not certain that P, therefore you don't know that.
Could you be wrong about everything you know? Or
and then I come along and say, well, no, you don't have to have certainty to have knowledge. I think that there are only two arguably.
Knowledge doesn't imply certainty.
Right. I think there are two propositions, because for years my position was you can't be absolutely certain of anything. Actually, that's changed, and I think there are two things you could be certain of. It would be.
I'm familiar with one of them.
I might, and you might just want to lump them together, but I would say that you exist and that you're experiencing. Now,
and that you're not omniscient. I know that I'm not omniscient. And, I know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't considered that before.
And so, I would say that. Well, actually, because there's the possibility that you have powers that you have abilities that you haven't figured out how to use. But then again, depends.
But not omniscience.
But if you
whatever that power is, it's not omniscience.
You can't know everything.
Know how to use it.
Right.
You can't know everything because you don't know that you know. The thing that you do know are the things that you don't know. Like, I don't know how to play the guitar. If I was omniscient, I would know.
I could grant that. So, anyway, so I think that you could have certainty that you exist. You could have certainty that you're experiencing. Now, I don't think you could have certainty that what you're experiencing is real, but you could have knowledge that it's real as long as it is. So, that's an important distinction for the
so where's your Nobel Prize?
And they try to get around the problem by just going, well, no, God grants me a foundation for rationality, and they literally just assert
they reveal it in such a way that I can be certain. There's your definition. I revealed in such a way that I can be certain. Well, why does the certainty matter? Because they think that it's a necessary condition for knowledge.
Well, and also, how do they prove that? Like, I don't see how they've solved their own problem. Because they're just
they don't.
Well,
so that's the ruse. So I'm also a close-up magician, and so it's basic mentalism and sleight of hand and misdirection. It's script.
Yeah,
it's not meant to resolve. Yeah, it's not meant to resolve disagreement or make philosophical progress. It's meant to shut the skeptic up.
So we have hit the 1 hour mark. So what I would like to do is have your final thoughts, because I really feel like we could go on for probably another, well, I would say another hour, but these types of discussions, I think, can go on for months. It's so interesting. And I think you would, every time that we ask a question, it kind of builds upon it and builds upon it. And that's what makes this such an interesting discussion. So I'd like to start with you, Ben. What are your final comments?
So I would very much encourage people to read up. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a great article on the internalism, externalism about knowledge debate. Highly recommend people look more into it, because it's one of those fun questions to keep you up at night and to think about. I've certainly enjoyed my time thinking about it. I'm really thankful to Bryce and Shane for joining me tonight to have these fun discussions, and for Sunny for hosting us.
Thank you. Shane, any final comments for you?
I just want to say that I'm right about everything, and everything that Ben agreed with me on, he was right about. Anything that he disagrees with me on, he was wrong about. That's how that works.
Foiled once again.
I mean, I just made my case. No, but I honestly, I absolutely love conversations about epistemology. How we come to justify our beliefs, how we come to know things, what knowledge is, I think is really just such an interesting question. And there are different categories of knowledge. There's just so much to know about knowing. And no, I think that the conversation's been fruitful and educational. I think you should absolutely post some links that you mentioned. I'm gonna post some links in the comments to some academic papers regarding internalism and externalism.
Nice.
And I'll do it in the comments rather than the live stream, so that it'll actually be there for people to see after the fact. But yeah, thank you guys for having me on. Thank you, Ben, for being on. Yeah, thanks everyone for engaging.
Thank you so much. It was really good working with both of you guys again. And Bryce, I want to hear your final comments as well.
Okay, I have two.
Okay.
The first of two final comments is I would like to thank our audience, especially because we have such an intelligent audience. I like that Farron and theoretically both mentioned Schrodinger's cat during that conversation. With respect to not. Anyone who knows what Schrodinger's cat knows how it relates to the Gettier cases, that the Snoop Dogg case that Shane was talking about. But the second thing I wanted to mention was I want people to recognize that encyclopedias and dictionaries are descriptive and they are reference materials, and they don't tell us what things mean. They just tell us how people think about what things mean and what they, how they use them. And so the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a great reference material, but it doesn't tell you what things mean. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I know that many people like to appeal to their definition of the word atheist as though that is the objectively correct historical usage of atheists, appealing to what the word means according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. So it doesn't mean any such thing because it means whatever the hell the person means when they say it.
Well, some words are context sensitive and can refer to more than one thing. And things like dictionaries and encyclopedias are our best way of coming to know what those words mean. Or our the best way to know converse, because
I would say that they're the best ways to know how what people meant when they used them in the past.
Yeah,
but they don't demand that we ought to be using them that way today.
Yeah, but I think when you talk to people, and this is especially important when you're learning a new language, which is relevant to me right now. What's mostly important is what people mean by the words they're using to convey their concept. You shouldn't be going, oh, well, this book over here says technically what you said really means this. Like if somebody calls you a douchebag, the dictionary definition isn't what they mean, right?
That's where I was going with that.
There's a slang word that they mean by it. But if you and someone are having a disagreement about what a word means, a dictionary is a helpful resource for you to be able to go, okay, well, what is the word according to the most authoritative thing we have on language. But like you were saying, it's descriptive, it changes over time, and some words are simply context sensitive. Skepticism can mean different things,
as it has in this conversation.
Yeah,
right.
So
absolutely
right,
because you defeated it and you're Shane the skeptic.
Yep. No, I put out a video called Skepticism Refuted, and so many people were didn't even watch the video and were just like, you can't defeat skepticism. It's like, just watch the video. But you'd see that it's like, I'm not your enemy. I think skepticism's good. I just think the whole point is you should apply skepticism to your beliefs and seek defeaters to your skepticism. Apply doubts, seek defeaters for the doubts. When you can't defeat your doubts, okay, stick with the doubts. But when you can defeat your doubts, defeat your doubts. And yeah.
Y'all are awesome. I don't even want to stop this, but I'm going to. Thank you. Right. Thank you guys so much. For those of you in the audience, if you like this type of content, please make sure to like, subscribe, share, hit the bell. And an even better way is if you want to join our Patreon. We have some wonderful Patreons that have joined with us. But we also have a bunch of other shows on the Skeptic Haven. We have Secular Soapbox, Women Atheist Unloaded, Sandbox Debates, One Good Reason, and The Bible Says What. So be sure and check all of those out. I want to, as Bryce already said, I want to thank all of our audience members. They're so interactive and they have such great comments. And we wouldn't be doing this without you guys. So thank you guys for doing this. I also want to thank the people behind the scenes. Wes, Phil, and Kat are absolutely amazing. They are producers and do all of the kind of stuff that we need. We also have Jena, Aaron, and Shane who make sure that everything else is done. Aaron and Shane are new to us, and they have gotten us some amazing guests like Ben and Shane. So I want to give a high five to them. In the meantime, I want to remind all of you that we always need to think critically. Good night, everybody.
It's a sunny day, we got some time to stay. Hey, 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 and everything's okay. It's a sunny day, we got some time to stay. Hey, 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 and everything's okay. Hot sun, the rain's gone, we gotta have a lot of fun. All my circle gone, a smiling face for everyone. Life can be so beautiful when you stop be judging. You'll just be free.